Social construction perspective argues that gender difference is a consequence and a byproduct of socialization and not biology. Whether we believe that gender difference is biologically determined or is a cultural formation, the interplay of gender difference assumes that gender is a property of individuals. That is, gender is a component of one's identity. But this is only half of the story. To what extent do we become gendered? That is, we learn to appropriate behaviors and traits that we associate with masculinity and femininity. And then we, each as individuals, negotiate our own path to a way that feels right for us. We cut our own deal with the dominant notions of masculine and feminine. This is why we resist gender stereotypes, because perhaps they do not actually encompass our experiences day to day. All institutions around us are gendered. These are sites where dominant definitions are reinforced and reproduced, and where deviance in regards to gender are disciplined. We become gendered selves in a gendered society. When we say we live in a gendered society, we imply that the organizations of our society evolve in ways that reproduce both differences between women and men and the domination of men over women. Gender means many feminine and many masculine. There is not one simple definition of masculinity and not one simple definition of femininity. What the social constructionist approach does is that it dislodges the notion that gender difference alone is decisive. We need to explore that gender differences among women and among men tend to be more decisive. Several meanings of masculinity and femininity coexist at the same time. Not all American men and women are the same. Our experiences are also shaped by class, race, ethnicity, sexuality, and region. Just because we make gender visible does not mean that all other organizing principles of social life are invisible. For example, an older black gay man in Chicago and a white heterosexual farm boy in Iowa have different definitions of masculinity. We cannot speak of masculinity and femininity as if they were constant, universal essences, common to all women and to all men. We must speak of femininities and masculinities in the plural. So what about masculinity? There are particular ways in which masculinity is defined currently in our culture. What do you think are the characteristics that define manhood today? They are tough, emotionally unavailable, violent, aggressive, etc. What happens to men who do not fit these characteristics? How do they negotiate their gendered identity? Part of understanding the social construction of gender is to understand that the processes that have shaped masculinity and to understand how this impacted men. As a society, we do not have the tools yet to discuss this. The continued invisibility of masculinity also means that the gendered standards that are held up as the norm also appear to us as to be gender neutral. To be a man or woman in our society is not just defined by the biological traits someone possesses, but more so by a set of expectations, norms, codes of behavior. The expectation of how a man or a woman should act in our society has been socially constructed and fed to us from a very young age. People internalize gender roles, for example, and respond to gender norms in our society. Children, for example, are not born knowing how to act as a girl or a boy. They learn to categorize themselves this way. This construction of femininity or masculinity normally begins with the color of our clothing. Traditionally, pink is for girls, blue is for boys. We see this occurring even before a child is born, when nursery rooms are set up, when people buy gifts for baby showers. Growing up as children, we are given toys that reinforce these rules of femininity or masculinity and also reflect what our future roles in society will be. Girls, for example, are given dolls and play kitchen sets because one day we're going to be mommies and we will be the one mostly who's going to be doing the cooking for her children and her husband. Boys, of course, are given chemistry sets and G.I. Joes because they will grow up to be smart, successful, strong, and powerful. So when we encounter something different from this idea, most people go into chaos. For example, the J. Crew advertisement of the woman painting her son's toenails pink sparked a controversy about what it means to be a boy or the girl. The video of a young Dyson, for example, who prefers to be a princess through what he wears, his dresses, brought up questions about his sexuality, even though he's far too young for these questions to come up. So these two cases are seen by society as largely as outliers of what it means to be a boy or a girl. We are taught from a young age that girls play with dolls and boys play with G.I. Joes. Yet as a society, we readily accept we're more likely to accept a girl who plays with toy trucks rather than a boy who paints his toenails pink and chooses to wear a princess dress. Children from a young age learn to begin monitoring each other's gendered behavior. Also, gender segregated activities, clothes, etc., perpetuate gender difference that reflect what many consider to be the biological and natural nature of female and male behavior. To be born a man or a woman in any society is more than simply a biological fact. Women constitute a distinct social group, and the character of that group, long neglected by historians, has nothing to do with feminine nature. Gender is a term now widely used to refer to those ways in which culture reformulates what begins as a fact of nature. The biological sexes are redefined, represented, valued, and channeled into different roles in various culturally dependent ways. Biology shows that outwardly, human beings can be divided into two sexes. Nevertheless, there are more combinations that result from five physiological areas, which in general and very simple terms determine what is the biological sex of a person's: genes, hormones, gonads, internal reproductive organs, and external reproductive organs. A quick but somewhat insufficient classifications of these combinations obliges to recognize at least five biological sexes. For example, men, people who have two testicles; women, people who have two ovaries; hermaphrodites, in which there are at the same time one testicle and one ovary; masculine hermaphrodites; and feminine hermaphrodites. As we note, even the idea that we have two sexes, male and female, is not the rule all of the time. Yet we have bought into this idea, and then we have placed cultural values on each identity. Social constructionist perspective highlights the idea that there is no one given reality. For theorists that rely on this perspective, reality is situated and does not exist outside of a context. There is not one truth but many, depending on your viewpoint and who you're speaking with. Gender, then, only exists in particular historical contexts. For example, not all societies recognize the gender binary male and female. In Native American traditions, we encounter a term called the two-spirit or berdak, who are people that fulfill mixed gender roles, both masculine and feminine, in Native American traditions. The media also reinforces notions of masculinity and femininity. Women, for example, many women have focused on challenging this idea of femininity. Women are depicted as passive victims, waiting around for Prince Charming, and tied to domestic work. Over the last number of years, women have become more involved in sports. They're no longer expected to always wear dresses or skirts, and they're taking on more powerful positions within society and more control over their own lives without so much a reliance on a man. However, what we as a society done for men? Have we done that much? Have we allowed men to challenge the idea of masculinity? Some would argue that we have left men in the shadows. Many men have already come to question their exact role in society as men. They used to be seen as protectors, breadwinners, leaders. Now that women are more independent, making money on their own and so forth, it has left men wondering what exactly their purpose is and what it is to be a man. The feminist author Bell Hooks states, "Patriarchal masculinity teaches men that their sense of self and identity, that their reason for being resides in their capacity to dominate others. To what extent are men afraid to challenge or to not conform to the stereotypical image of a man or being masculine, that they somehow become more feminine? It's as if though there can only be one definition of what it is to be a man, and that this definition cannot be expanded or flexible. Do we need alternative views of masculinity? Perhaps what we need is a vision of masculinity where self-esteem and self-love for one's uniqueness is the basis for identity." Gender representations are important to take into account because even though they are cultural constructions, they affect how we see ourselves. For example, to what extent has the category woman in the media been affected by the male gaze? In a world ordered by sexual imbalance, pleasures in looking has been split between active male and passive female. The determining male gaze projects his fantasy onto the female figure, which styles it accordingly. In their traditional exhibitionist role, women are simultaneously looked at and displayed with their appearance coded for strong visual and erotic impact. We can see this in many advertisements around us today. Usually the main focus of the advertisement is on the woman's looks, her body, her pose, and her sexuality. Yet we hardly ever think what the impact of such an obsession with particular female bodies does to us as men and women. To what extent have advertisements and the media shaped what it means to be an ideal woman? How does this impact both genders? The same happens with men. But how does these images reflect our cultural obsession with bodies? For example, currently 7 million women suffer from eating disorders in the United States today. How does an obsession with these particular notions of beauty affect young girls today? These are questions that we should be asking of the world around us. If we go back to the bell hooks quote, we realize that we have a lot of work to do ahead of us. We must understand that addressing masculinity and femininity are not only academic endeavors. Our world would be a much better place if we would be free to act the way we want and express the way we feel without being burdened by what we should or should not do according to our sex. Perhaps this will make for a better society, one that moves away from patriarchy and that benefits healthy relationships and men and women so that we could become more complete human beings. With this, I will wrap up this lecture and I look forward to all your replies.